Wonderful meeting in San Francisco. The last time I met George, it was in South Africa. So we were talking about South Africa in the previous communication. And it was in 2012 for the World Economic History Congress. And we had a chance to visit the Cape of Good Hope. So I wish the next meeting for them or something like that. It's a pleasure to be here. So I will introduce myself very briefly. I work in Paris West University, and my research is focused on a special subject, which may be at the margin of Damien's questions, because I work on the financing of households. So my PhD a long time ago was on the financing of housing in France, between from the 30s to the end of the 60s. And my last book, which was published 2 years ago, was about emerging consumer credit market in France and in comparison with the Western European countries. So today I will present you a communication about this emerging consumer credit market in France throughout a singular experience. It's the experience of economic unions, and it's an experience of a sort of illegal credit. So it's very interesting because there were a lot of publications about consumer credits, but about institutional credit. So I'm going to talk about this informal consumer credit in the mid-20th century Europe, and especially in France. So the original French economic unions, how can we define these unions? The first one, we can say the original and the genuine one, were formed by small retailers at the beginning of the 20th century. These unions were set up in very small and medium-sized cities, and it's interesting because it was in industrial areas, and especially in the north of France, with the coal mine cities, so-called in French les corons. It was set up to compete with the Parisian department stores. As you may know, we have two posters of the end of the 80s at the 19th century. So on the one hand you have aux classes laborieuses, so it's working class, and it's an ad for the credit sale. So you have 2 moments of the household's life: before credit, so a very frugal furniture and poverty, you can see, and after credit, it's almost like bourgeoisie, so it's a mean to increase in this social scale, and it's a very interesting advertisement. And on the other hand, you have also an advertisement for a kind of department stores in Paris. It's Le Pèlerin Saint-Jean, and you can see that confidence is closely linked with credit sale, because in France, consumer credit had bad reputation, so it was a sort of to convince working class that they can buy on credit. So you have the genuine economic unions, but you have also, after World War II, and it's a specific moment for the consumer credit market, the fake French economic union. So it's very different, because the first one was set up by true shopkeepers, but after it was a sort of crafty fellows or credit smugglers, but not shopkeepers, who wanted to make quick profit. And it was the moment just after the World War II, because the purchasing power of the French people were very low, was very low. So it was the moment to create a sort of fake companies to provide credit for this very popular population. So the aim of this paper is to show how the lack of consumer credit regulation in France in early post-war has offered an opportunity for the development of illegal lending. So I will be developing 3 main points. The first point is the position of the credit authorities to the development, the opposition to the development of consumer credit. Then I will move on the rise of a black credit throughout the fake economic union's experience. And to finish, I will see the regulation about consumer credit to suppress informal lending. So the first question is the opposition to the development of consumer credit by the credit authorities. So I want to, for starting, to make clear the general historical context in France just after World War II. In December 1945, the French government, led by Charles de Gaulle, decided to nationalize the credit industry and the credit enterprises and the main banks, including the Bank of France. The Credit Nationalization Law created a National Credit Council to define credit policy and regulate the banking sector. This institution, the NCC, was closely linked to Bank of France and to the Ministry of Finance. In October 1947, the Minister of Finance expressed concern about the development of illegal lenders and high interest rates and asked the Bank of France to carry out a survey of the consumer credit market. So throughout this survey, we can observe the situation of the consumer credit market just after World War II. So we have, on the hand, the credit companies which were set up by the Parisian department stores. For example, Le Printemps, La Samaritaine founded credit companies just at the beginning of the 20th century. And it was similar in the United Kingdom. At the end of the 19th century, you have the Provident. I don't know if you know this very big department store. So the Provident set up also credit companies, and especially throughout vouchers for popular population. So, and these department stores set up specific technique of credit. It was based on vouchers, also called credit check. And to sum up this technique, the borrower had to pay a minimum down payment. Generally, it was 40% of the item price. And it was a short-term loan. The maximum of the loan was 6 months. But it could be week loan or sometimes payday loan. And we know payday loan until nowadays. Then a broker used to collect the repayments every week through households. On the other hand, after World War I, the car manufacturers, the French car manufacturers, but also in the United States, of course, the Henry Ford, which was the first one, like for France, André Citroën or Armand Peugeot, or Louis Renault, of course, followed the American example and set up their own consumer finance companies to provide credit for their customers. It was installment credit, so a technique different from vouchers credit, of course. And the down payment was around 30%, and the loan lasted 1 year or 1 year and a half. It depends of the companies. An interesting point, it's during the crisis of the 40s in 1934 in France, in order to boost the cars sale, a law was passed. It was the Malingre law, and this was a guarantee for the lenders to repossess, in case of down payment, the car. And it's a specific point because contrary of the civil law in the United States or in the United Kingdom and maybe in the German law, I think, in France, when you sell something, it owes to the person who bought it. So it's different. You can't repossess something, even if the credit is not repaid. So it's a risk, of course, for the lenders. So in 1934, a law made an exception for the new cars. in order to boost this market. And so you have this kind of credit. You have the department style credit. And the Bank of France survey pointed out the gap between, of course, the low consumer purchasing power in France and the high demand of consumer goods. The main consequence of this situation was the development of illegal lending and the high interest rates which was observed. So in this survey, the Bank of France decided, well, it was quite surprised because the situation was not good. But the Bank of France refused to regulate this sector. Why? There is this kind, so you can see ad for French car brand in the 50s, of course, is Simca. And despite the high demand of consumer credit and the high development of illegal lending, the National Credit Council refused to regulate the market. Why? Mainly for three reasons. Three arguments were evoked. The first one is an economic reason. The industrial investments in France was the priority after the war. So nationalized companies were a priority to have financing and not the households. The second one was the monetary reason. The inflation risk was very high at this moment. In 1947 in France, you had 70% of inflation for the year. French, compared with the other European countries, remain very low. So you can see in the table. So France, the average household indebtedness in 1965 was 154 francs, and West Germany 163, Great Britain twice higher, 212, and of course United States, you can see the very big difference because you have 1,037, so it's 10 higher than the French level. So to conclude, and I hope I will be on time, first point, economic unions, it was a full lending sector between the face-to-face credit from retailers and the registered credit finance companies. In the early post-war, it was a response to the lack of legal lending for households. And at the last, the regulation which passed in 1954 promote banking consumer credit to control the use, but also the quantity of credit in order to prevent inflation and to fight against usury. So I do thank you for your listening, and at the end it's just a pun. In France you can see Le bonheur est dans le prêt. It's an advertisement for Crédit Agricole, and in French le prêt it's the meadow, Crédit Agricole, agricultural credit, but also the loan. It's an homonym, so it's a pun on the meaning of the prêt. The happiness is in the loan. But also in the middle, so that's why I put it. And if you want to, I have posted on YouTube a little video on my last book, so you can, if you are interested, you can see another time for this presentation. Thank you very much.
Why a Cadillac? That's a Cadillac.
Yeah, it's not a French car. It's not a Simca or Renault. It's very fun too. But Cadillac is American, so it's very emblematic of consumer credit.
And expensive, high end too.
Yeah, to improve of life, of French life.
I don't see very many American cars when I'm in France. Of course, I don't see very many French cars here.
Especially Cadillac convertibles.
It's very iconic for the French at this time.
Maybe the movies.
Yeah.
One quick question. Did it work? I mean, all these changes in the credit, did it?
Yes.
Could they see the effect?
It worked. It worked because credit policy in France was very tightened, was under control. So it worked perfectly well.
But industrial output went up, consumer goods sales went up or not?
Yes. There was a little backwardness of equipment for fridges, especially if you compare with the United Kingdom or the United States. But at the beginning of the 70s, thanks to the economic growth, of course, and to the consumer credit, this backwardness was getting more and more tightened if you compare with other countries. So yes, it worked. I confirm.
Is French credit today much lower than in other European countries still?
Yeah. And it's surprising because CETLM, which was set up in 1953, is the European leader consumer credit on personal loans for all Europe. It's the first companies for granted credit in the European countries with different brands according to the countries, of course. But CETLM is in Italy and Spain, and well, it's the leader in Europe for personal loans. And it's a French company. But France is not the main market. And now they conquered Eurasian market too. So CETLM decided to invest in Russia and also in all the European, Eastern European countries, because the markets goes up and not in France, especially since the subprime crisis in 2007. Yes.
Sabine, I was just wondering if you had any data or evidence on the profitability of the illegal lending before the restrictions came in.
No statistics, because the first statistic, it was in 1954 with the regulation. Before, you can find no statistics.
The analogy I'm drawing in my own mind here is to immediately after World War II in France, maybe analogous to modern microfinance lending in poor parts of the world. And what we find there is that even though the interest rates are high and people naturally use the word usury as a result, it's not necessarily the case, because the credit risk was so high. And I'm expecting
Yes,
that was the case right after World War
No,
II.
it wasn't the case. For all the European countries, you can see the population reimburse very well the loans. So for CETLM, for example, in the mid-50s, the percentage of no reimbursement of the loans were lower than 1% of the global outstanding of loans. So that wasn't the problem at this period. For the households, it's not like microfinance, because microfinance is for production or to create business. It's a bit different, I think.
But very few of those loans are used for that purpose.
Yes.
Hey, just a quick question. Looking at your wonderful graphics, how much of the story of post-war consumer credits in France, how much of that story is about changing household attitudes towards debt and taking on debt? Because, ever since the experience of John Law, France has had this real aversion to debt, and money is problematic, right? So but it seems, looking at those graphics, really, they're trying to change people's attitudes about taking on debt in a household, and so it becomes a positive. A lot of those graphics you have show that you're investing in the future by buying these things now on credit.
Yeah, it's also a question of generation, because before the baby boomers generation, it was much more difficult to convince people, and especially middle-class people, to buy on credit, because they were reluctant to grant a credit. It wasn't in the culture. The credit was for the poorest of the population. It was for the working class, who bought on credit everything, like food and clothes and something like that. So after World War II, with the new generations, with the baby boomers, so the shift was mainly in the mid-60s, with the first generations of baby boomers. So they know the nanny state with the social insurance, which was set up in 1945 in France, La Sécurité Sociale. So they didn't need to save for the health, for the retirement, for example. So it has changed completely the attitude, the behavior faced with the credit. It was completely different. They didn't want to wait for enjoying life, so they didn't hesitate to ask for credit. And this cultural shift was mainly analyzed by Roland Barthes, for example, but also with a writer like Georges Perec in a very famous novel which was published in 1965 called Les Choses, the things, material interest in the 60s. So it's very important, this shift in the middle of the 60s. But it's a question of generation, because before the parents, the couple hesitated to grant a credit, but after it's enjoyed. And of course you have 1968 slogans, and in France c'est jouissez d'abord, vous paierez après, so enjoy before and you paid after.
Thank you.
Yes, one more question. When CETELEM was formed, what sort of minimum qualifications were required?
For the customers, for the
customers.
borrowers?
For the customer, yeah.
The main criteria was the housing. You need to live in your, well, not in your own housing, it's not a question of property, but you can't stay in a hotel, for example, because after World War II and until the end of 50s, a lot of people in France were obliged to live in their hotel because of their housing shortage. So you have to be in an apartment or a house, and there is some qualifications also for the jobs. You can be a waiter in a bar. You couldn't be because it was considered as a bad job or a risky job. And but otherwise, the majority of the customers for CETELEM at the end of the 50s, it was working class and middle class customers. So it wasn't the upper class, it wasn't, you can say that in France, les cadres, the management personnel. For the higher incomes, they had a bank account. So they could ask to their bank a personal loan since 1959. So during the construction of the European Common Market, the French banks decided to propose to their customers a personal loan, but it was only for very few people, because French didn't have bank accounts until the end of the 60s. If you look the situation, if you observe the situation at the end of the 50s, only 20% of the population in France had a bank account. And the shift is a result of the policy to pay the wages or the salaries by month. And it's at the end of the 60s. So the state decided to change the situation. But before, bank accounts was only for rich people and not for the male French population.